Alright, let's meet one of the most beloved poets in the English-speaking world, Robert Burns, or as the Scots fondly call him, Rabbi Burns. Burns was a Scottish poet and lyricist, widely regarded as the national poet of Scotland, and that fact has been asked in exams. He is also the best-known writer in the Scots language, though he often blended Scots with English so beautifully that even modern readers can still follow the rhythm and feeling of his lines. This light Scots dialect, as it's called, has also been highlighted in exam questions. Burns lived a short but extraordinary life. He was born into a farming family, and much of his poetry reflects the language, humor, and hardship of rural Scotland. But don't mistake him for a simple rustic bard. Burns was an early pioneer of Romanticism, celebrating nature, love, and the dignity of ordinary people long before Wordsworth and Coleridge appeared. That idea, his role as a romantic forerunner, is another key exam point. After his death, Burns became a symbol of national pride. He inspired both liberal and socialist thinkers, becoming a cultural icon not just in Scotland but across the world. By the 19th century, his life had become a kind of national cult, celebrated every year on Burns Night, complete with poetry readings, bagpipes, and haggis. Now, let's look at some of his most famous works. His song Auld Lang Syne is a global classic often sung on New Year's Eve at midnight when people join hands and sing to bid farewell to the old year. That tradition has been asked in exams. The phrase Auld Lang Syne literally means old long since, or as we might say, for the sake of old times. The song's warmth, its nostalgia, and its simple melody have made it one of the most recognizable farewell songs in history. Then we have A Red, Red Rose, written in 1794. The poem begins, "My luve is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June." Simple, musical, and heartfelt. It's based on traditional Scottish folk tunes, and yes, that's been asked in exam too. The poem, also published under the title "Oh My Love is Like a Red, Red Rose," is all about enduring love, love that lasts until the seas gang dry and the rocks melt with the Sunday. Next we come to his narrative poem Tam O'Shanter, written in 1790 and first published in 1791. This is Burns at his most vivid and humorous. The poem tells the story of Tam, a farmer who gets drunk one stormy night and, while riding home on his horse, Meg, stumbles upon a haunted church where witches and warlocks are dancing wildly while the devil plays the bagpipes. Tam, being a bit too curious, shouts out in admiration, and suddenly the music stops. The witches chase him to the river Doon since they can't cross running water. Tam barely escapes, but poor Meg loses her tail when one witch grabs it just before the bridge. This mixture of comedy, superstition, and adventure makes Tam O'Shanter one of Burns's best narrative poems. And yes, the line count, around 228 lines, has also been asked in exam. Other major poems you must remember include To a Mouse, To a Louse, A Man's a Man, For A, That, and Scots Wahe. Each captures a different side of Burns, his humor, his empathy, his nationalism, and his belief in human equality. Scots Wahe, in fact, served for a long time as Scotland's unofficial national anthem. Burns's strength lies in his sincerity. He wrote about ordinary life, the mouse whose nest he ploughs up, the louse crawling on a lady's bonnet, the fleeting beauty of love, and the moral courage of the poor. His words feel alive because they come straight from experience. So, to summarize for your exam, Burns is the national poet of Scotland and wrote in Scots dialect. He is considered a pioneer of Romanticism. His major works include Auld Lang Syne, Tam O'Shanter, A Red, Red Rose, To a Mouse, and To a Louse. And remember, Auld Lang Syne is sung at New Year's Eve as a song of farewell. Robert Burns lived only 37 years, but his poetry continues to sing not just for Scotland, but for every heart that treasures friendship, love, and freedom. All right, let's talk about George Crabbe, a fascinating figure who stood at the crossroads between classicism and realism, a poet, surgeon, and clergyman all rolled into one. Crabbe began his career in the 1770s as a doctor's apprentice, then moved on to become a surgeon, and later found his true voice as a poet. That career shift from medicine to literature has been asked in exam. In 1780, he travelled to London to make his living as a writer, but like many early poets, he struggled financially. Desperate, he reached out to Edmund Burke, the great statesman and critic. Luckily, Burke was impressed by his writing and took him under his wing. That friendship changed Crabbe's life. Burke not only supported him financially, but also helped him publish his early poems and introduced him to London's literary society. From there, Crabbe's reputation began to grow. He later became chaplain to the Duke of Rutland and spent the rest of his life as a clergyman, balancing parish duties with poetry. Over time, he formed friendships with major figures like Sir Walter Scott and Wordsworth, both of whom admired his work. In fact, Lord Byron famously called him nature's sternest painter, yet the best, a quote that has been asked in exam. Crabbe's poetry is quite distinct from his romantic contemporaries. While Wordsworth idealized rural life, Crabbe showed it as it really was: harsh, poor, and morally complex. His verse was unsentimental, written in heroic couplets, and focused on the struggles of middle and working class people. That combination of realism and Augustan form is what makes his work unique, and yes, both heroic couplets and depiction of provincial life have been asked in exam. His most famous works include The Village from 1783, a direct response to Goldsmith's The Deserted Village, as well as poems 1807, The Borrow 1810, Tales 1812, and Tales of the Hall 1819. Critics like Frank Whitehead have called Crabbe an undervalued major poet, bridging the social realism of Defoe with the moral depth of later Victorian writers. So, in short, if Goldsmith mourned the countryside, Crabbe dissected it clinically, honestly, and compassionately. Now, let's shift from the poet of realism to a fiery critic, John Dennis, one of the liveliest critical voices of the early 18th century. Dennis was educated at Harrow School and Cambridge, and after moving to London, he became friends with many major writers of his time. He was both a critic and a dramatist, though his plays were never very successful. Still, his critical writings shaped early 18th century aesthetics. Two of his key works, both asked in exam, are The Usefulness of the Stage, 1698, and The Advancement and Reformation of Modern Poetry, 1701. In these essays, Dennis emphasized passion over polish. He argued that poetry's power lies in emotion, not mere correctness, a radical idea for a time obsessed with decorum. He admired John Milton deeply, calling him a model of grandeur and sublimity. In fact, Dennis was among the first English critics to use the word sublime in a modern aesthetic sense, linking it to awe, vastness, and emotional intensity. But Dennis is also famous or infamous for his quarrel with Alexander Pope. Pope mocked Dennis in his essay on criticism, and Dennis retaliated with reflections critical and satirical in 1711, where he attacked Pope personally, even calling him a hunchbacked toad. The feud lasted until Dennis's death, and Pope immortalized him in the Dunciad, which has been asked in exam as one of the dunces of dull criticism. Despite the ridicule, Dennis's ideas about the sublime and the emotional core of art helped prepare the ground for romantic aesthetics. He also defended drama passionately, even countering Jeremy Collier's famous attack on the stage in 1698. So while Pope stood for polished wit, Dennis stood for raw passion, and his arguments mark one of the earliest moves away from neoclassical restraint toward romantic energy.